Hi. So, this is going to be my second time attempting to explain this concept, which is basically I'm going to share some perspectives that I have in order to share something that I have learned or come to realize about being an empath. And this may be an unpopular opinion. So I'm going to try to explain how I've come to this and why I believe this in order to ease one into an understanding about what it is I'm sharing. And also I'd like to recognize that it's not wrong to not be comfortable with this. And the reason someone would maybe not be comfortable with this is because they haven't yet been validated or fully understood their empathy within themselves. Okay, so I just came to a point where I had a bigger understanding of my own empathing, and I want to share the perspective because I feel it's very freeing, and for those who are ready to consider it. So this meme is something that I just screenshotted on Facebook a little while ago. It says, "Empaths be like, I don't just listen to your words. I listen to your use of words, your tone, your body movements, your eyes, your subtle facial expressions. I interpret your silences. I can hear everything you don't say in words." And the quote is by unknown. And a lot of people have shared this and liked this and reacted to this meme, right? And the person who shared it here said 100%, 100%. See, people feel validated by this view, right? Because that is the perspective they're in. That they are really clued in to the other's kind of energy and everything. And I want to invite us to consider that empathing becomes available to us when we have reason to be hypervigilant in childhood, when there is emotional dysregulation in the home, power struggles, lack of safety, survival, trauma, things like this cause children to adapt by being hypervigilant, really cluing in, paying attention to everything about the people in their environment so that they know how to avoid certain reactions, really. Okay? So that's one premise that I want to point out here. And another is that I do healing work, meaning I discovered my own need to heal, and I've worked on healing myself over many years now, more than 10, and I have understood there's a certain formula, there's a certain way energy works within humans. I've also done astrology, and I've come to look at the astrology chart as sort of like the lesson plan for a human. So when a human comes in to incarnate on Earth, they come in at a certain time, date, and location, which causes certain angles in the planetary placements and as well as the asteroids to imprint them, to affect them, to sort of paint the perspective using energy on what will be experienced during the incarnation on Earth. And I also think that as we learn and understand through our time on Earth, that we become free by transcending the energy of our birth chart that we came in to experience. So we learn what we need to learn, and then we can operate above the energy that we were learning from. So we create balance in the energy, and then we transcend it. So we understand fully all sides of it. We're not resisting it. We've kind of mastered it or studied it enough to our soul's plan. Okay, so this energy is what creates, it's what we respond to create our life's experience. So if we have not quite understood an energy, we will respond to it in such a way that it anchors into our body, and we will continue to experience it in order to have more opportunities to understand it. Another way to say this is, here's a human incarnating on Earth, and say this is a child, and they come into an experience of trauma. Now I'm just going to make this signify trauma, this little red mark. But they don't quite understand it, they don't have the context to understand it. So there's pieces of understanding around it. There's maybe an explanation chosen, or maybe a coping mechanism is now implanted for the operating system on how we're going to operate in the world in order to avoid that feeling again, because that doesn't feel good. I don't understand it. I want to avoid it. But what we resist persists. So this can't be avoided. It's just thrown ahead to the future. And now when this person travels along their path, gains more experience through living, they come to a point where they will again experience this same energy. And now they've learned a lot, they have grown, they may have a better understanding of it at that time, but if they cannot fully understand it to the degree they meant to, again they'll throw it forward into the future to experience again. Okay, so this then becomes a pattern where this always is experienced when it's triggered or activated. It's the same way PTSD works, where someone is triggered in a reaction to experience that same initial feeling that was lodged in them. And it's for the purpose of having another opportunity to understand it. But this doesn't just happen for large-scale traumatic events. It can happen for everyday events as well. And if we have these, which we all do have these, we're also seeing life through the lens of them. So everything we see is filtered through the lens of this experience. Whatever we're doing to cope with that, having had that experience and not fully understanding it yet, will be the lens we see life through. Okay. So when we see people, grown adults, shaming and blaming each other, if you think about it, the way that punishment and reward parenting is done, it requires a parent to entice a child to live by a certain standard or a certain set of rules, and it's done through punishment when the child does not comply, and reward when they do. And instead of children learning by what we tell them, they actually learn by what we do. We are examples. That's how humans learn, by having an example. So when a parent is looking at the child and constantly deciding whether what they've done should be rewarded or punished, that child now downloads into their operating system The same tendency, so it's downloaded from the environment, the parents, that same tendency to look at others and decide whether they are doing something that should be punished or rewarded. So this is why we see grown adults looking and pointing their fingers at others, saying, that's good, that's bad. It's reminiscent of the experience of having your parent do that to you. And when your parent does that to you, it will lodge in you one of these things that needs to be understood. So you throw it into the future, and now you meet somebody else. And when you can't see it in yourself, humans do a thing called projection. If they don't know this boo-boo is right here, this lodged energy waiting to be understood is right here, they'll actually see it through this lens in another person. So they'll say, oh, you're the one who needs to be told whether you're being punished or rewarded right now, or whether what you're doing is approved or not. We need to tell you this because this adult is just doing what their parental figure or caretaker modeled to them and inspired them to do and downloaded them with, and they're seeing life through that lens. And since they're not aware of it in themselves, they're just doing it to someone else. Okay? This is how it works. Now, when someone realizes that anything we see outside of ourselves shows us something about ourselves, they may take back that projection and say, oh, maybe it's not you. Why am I seeing that in you? Oh, this is a pattern. I've been doing this for a while. I realize I've been looking to try to tell people what to do and decide if they're right or wrong, decide who needs to be punished, decide who needs to be praised. And then they realize, oh, it's because that's what was done to me. And I understand why I've been doing it, and it's not bad or wrong that I've been doing it. I love the part of me who was able to take that example and carry it out to see what it was like, but I also see why it's causing a division between me and my fellow humans who are also just doing their best. And they may learn something and have different experiences than I had, so they may look at life differently, and it's not wrong. I can't possibly know more or better than they know for themselves. I can't possibly. That was something that I thought I knew because that's how my parental figures operated. But actually, it may be a flawed premise. Actually, when I look at my own children, I can see that sometimes they're inspired to do things that are genius or creative, and I don't need to punish or reward them for it. I just need to keep them safe, So things like this, the truths become more and more apparent as we clear the filters that we're seeing life through, which are really just reminiscent of the examples that we downloaded into us from our earlier on experiences. Okay, so I would then say that another way to explain having a download of the experience that you are witnessing from your caregiver would be like mimicking. You're mimicking your caregiver when you download into your programming to cope or act or behave in the same way that was modeled to you. Now, besides that, in infancy, when we are very little tiny babies, it's supposed to be a blanket swaddle. The way that we bond with our parental figure is through mimic. Right? If you're a mom or dad and you spent time with an infant, you know that you look into the baby's eyes and you make sounds, and they mimic the sounds, or they mimic the smiles. There is a stage of infancy that the bonding takes place through mimic. Okay? Now, just say that this parent is operating through some of the misunderstood energies from earlier on in their life that they mimicked from their own parent, and maybe their own parent was distracted and couldn't pay attention during mimic time. So the bond was broken between infant and caregiver. And now this infant is not fully bonded to the parent through the mimic. In particular, it's the mimic that is misunderstood, because mimic did not elicit a bond as was planned for the mammal that the human is. And now this infant grows into an adult with this mimic energy waiting to be understood, and they are going to other adults and they're looking to mimic. So instead of a projection here, they're going, oh, what's this person doing? I can tell that they're using this certain tone. They're moving their body this certain way. Their eyes are moving this way. They're subtle in facial expressions. Oh, I know what they're not saying. I'm really clued in and paying attention to this other person, so much so that I feel, and I am mimicking perfectly based on my ability to mimic as an infant, which happens automatically, and it's stuck on because it never got the successful bond that it was meant to have. And now I am latched on to the idea of perpetually mimicking others in order to bond. But I do not yet understand that's what's going on. It's in my subconscious, below the level of awareness. It just keeps happening until I notice the pattern of, wow, every person I come in contact, I just feel their feelings. I can see when they're upset. I can see when they're confused. I can see that they're unhappy. I can see that they're ill. I have the same illness as them. It's unbearable in some instances to take on and mimic all the pains of each person you're trying to bond with, because it's not going to stop, because the bond wants to be created. So the mimic is perpetually looking for and potentially even mimicking several others at a time to try to understand that mimic energy that was never successful. It never got fully understood, as an infant was not able to comprehend what was going on here. The infant was not able to say, oh, my mom's depressed. Oh, my mom's distracted. Oh, my mom is ill. Oh, my mom is exhausted. Whatever it was below the level of awareness of what an infant could comprehend. So it got lodged in the operating system as something to figure out later. It was thrown into the future. And it's thrown into the future all along the way. All along the way. Every person being encountered that this person now wants to bond with in any way is mimicked. And my understanding is now that empaths be like mimics. And I believe that is what's actually going on. And just so you know, I, at one point in my journey, did identify as an empath, but then I was able to heal my so-called absorption of other people's pain and discomfort. So I realized, okay, I'm more than just an empath. I'm a lot of things. But it was more difficult for me to stop so-called absorbing the stuff of my mom and my kids. Like, it was like I even got ill with the same illnesses that my mom had. Meaning, like, she had fibromyalgia, then I got fibromyalgia. I visited my grandmother in the hospital who was dying of autoimmune hepatitis. I was then hospitalized with autoimmune hepatitis. Like, my energy body literally mimicked to such a great degree with the people that I wanted to bond with the most, which was my mother, my grandmother, and then my kids also. And so I realized, okay, there's something here, and I always thought it was a boundary issue. Sorry about that. I'm just going to take a sip of water. Obviously, my voice has been scratchy through this whole thing, so that's interesting. So then when I realized, and was working on my boundaries and got that secure and realized it was still an issue with my mom and my children, I was just open to seeing it another way. And because I had already been using these methods and these understandings to heal everything else in my life, it just dawned on me during a session with my life coach, actually just talking through something, I realized, oh wow, this is reminiscent of the mimic stage of infancy. And from there, I was able to shift it. And so I think it's understandable that some people don't believe that empaths are absorbing other people's stuff, right? And it's understandable that they don't believe it because maybe they don't have to work through an understanding of the mimic wound, right? So if they don't have that perspective in front of them, they're not going to understand it. It doesn't invalidate the experience of an empath as having absorbed the other person. But what I'm suggesting, as we see here, is that they're doing it because of a want to bond, because the mimic program, the mimic phase was not completed in infancy. And so in order to heal that, there has to be the recognition of that, and then a willingness to kind of reparent and be very sovereign and also be very gentle and understand that when you do find yourself mimicking or empathing another, that you may just want to be bonded with that person, and there may be just some self-talk or analysis of whether that's actually happened already. There may just be a process of letting the subconscious catch up to what the reality is, which is you are bonded with these people to the degree that you're meant to be, to the degree that both parties agree, to the degree that your heart is open to it. We're all connected. Our energies are all connected, and so this is really just people reflecting back to us our wound, always. So say you mimic this person, like I'm going to use my own experiences as an example, but say you mimic this person for the liver disease, like I did with my grandmother, and this person for the fibromyalgia. First of all, I'm going to have to heal my liver issue and heal my fibromyalgia first, right? Or can I just go to the idea of the bonding issue and get it at the root cause? Each person will have their own process to go through depending on what perspectives they're meant to experience in order to master the understanding of the energy that they wanted to have as a soul. So none of it's wrong. Even though I've come to this conclusion, it's okay. This could be completely true, and it's okay if another person doesn't embody or integrate or operate by this knowledge. It's okay if they still run their mimic loop until they've experienced all that they're meant to experience through having that perspective. It's not for me to say when it's time for them to stop doing that. But for those that are ready, for those who would like to look at this from a different perspective, I'm sharing this here. So, this is not to say that anything's gone wrong. It's not to say that this perspective is wrong. It's just what I feel for me is a bigger awareness about that perspective, why it's happening, which also lends to me clues about what I can do to stop that cycle from happening. Because as you know, if you are an empath, it can be very unpleasant to feel overwhelmed by so-called absorbing other people's discomfort, right? And feeling helpless to change it for them and so on. And it can feel like you might want to be isolated in order to avoid it, which would actually maybe cause you to adopt coping mechanisms to deal with a lack of bonding. And maybe eventually, like me, you would come around to the idea that bonding was actually something you wanted. So then it would be time to venture out back into the world, right? And start connecting with people without absorbing, without mimicking, being a sovereign person. So in order to do that, that requires me to deprogram and clear the filters that I'm seeing people through so that I can present myself as myself. And myself knows my strengths, knows my weaknesses, has loved all the parts of me that didn't feel loved. So I'm not seeking anything from the other in the way of needing their approval or bond or to feel connected to them by mimicking them. I am coming as I am and letting the experience with them impress upon me instead of trying to manipulate it or create something there that may not be natural, that may not be healthy, that may feel uncomfortable for the other person, in fact. So this allows them the space to be who they are as well. And strengths and weaknesses, both. Like, it's not wrong to have strengths and weaknesses. It's part of being human. We're not all equipped with the same specialties, and that's a beautiful thing. Okay, so this is just some insights that I've had. I'm interested to see and hear what you have to say about this, and how does this fit with what you believe and how you've been experiencing life and your empathing and your woundedness and your healing. Please feel free to share in the comments or write me an email if you don't feel comfortable sharing there. I am really curious to kind of see how this sits with other people who are on this healing journey and understand the way energy works as far as healing goes. So, and if you do need assistance, I am taking private sessions. They can be booked through my website. And yeah, that's that, folks. All right. Thank you for your time, and perhaps we'll see you in a future talk.